Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson, a World Alternative Media here, and of course we're joined by author and economic analyst here at WAM, John Sneisen, and huge news, something that we have been warning about, I believe, as long as we've been a channel. That is the interest rates. We talked about 4 years ago or so about how they would try to force interest rates up out of desperation at the Federal Reserve, and then, of course, they won't be able to raise them enough, and they'll have to drop them out, and eventually we're going to see negative interest rates. We haven't gone to the negative yet, but as of today, July 31st, as we record this, getting out on August 1st, the Fed has lowered interest rates by about a quarter point, and the markets are definitely reacting to this, and this is a big sign of the crisis to come. But first, let's talk about what is going on. And as the CNBC article says, Fed cuts rate by a quarter point, cites global developments muted inflation. And as a key points point to, the policymaking Federal Open Market Committee drops the target range for its overnight lending rate to 2% to 2.25%, or 25 basis points from the previous level. The Fed cites implications of global developments for the economic outlook, as well as muted inflation pressures in its first rate cut since December 2008. The Fed also leaves the door open to future cuts, saying it will act as appropriate to sustain the expansion. The central bank also ends its balance sheet reduction 2 months earlier than planned. And it's interesting because we've been warning about this, as I mentioned, for a long time. And of course, it's going towards negative interest rates. We know that by now. I mean, when we see this kind of action in kind of a depressionary scenario like we are in right now, as these banks are bankrupt and as we see all these countries around the world desperately drop out interest rates, we are on the verge of one of the most historic moments for the monetary system in history, and I'm not fear-mongering. This is basic economics. John, can you talk a little bit about what we have seen from the Fed and the announcements made by Powell?
Well, again, the Fed is trying to, and Powell was trying to say in his speech that, everything is fine. We're just like almost making like the interest rate cut as an insurance policy, they're calling it. It's just a whole bunch of course, Fed speak, which is all over the place, trying to confuse the hell out of you and not making you understand the real issue here, which is the Fed interest rate cut. And if you take a look at this chart here that I'm going to pull up, because this chart should wake people up to what is coming, because any interest rate cut has, of course, started to follow a crisis. And a market correction and a big recession usually, and what we've seen is over the last let's pull it back all the way to the 50s here and see how much they dropped it on an average like when they had to cut interest rates. So the first time was in the 70s. Of course, we all know what happened there, where the United States was basically bankrupt. They had to go away from the gold standard.
I wonder why that happened.
Yeah, they dropped the interest rate 7.75% that time in order to manipulate the market back up again and trying to make it confident. And then they raised it all the way up to 14%, and then they dropped it 11.8% in the late 70s. And then, of course, we went all the way up to the 80s, where they were as high as 22%. And then they dropped it 14% all the way down to about 8%. And then the next drop again was about 6%, then 7.5%, then 6.1%, then 5.2% was the latest one, which is, of course, 2008. And if they were to drop at 5.2%, Josh, well, we would be at, let's see, that'd be about negative 3% that they would be having to push it down to in order to stimulate the economy. The problem is negative interest rate doesn't work, and it's been clearly shown all across Europe. You got Japan with negative 1%, you got Switzerland negative 75. 0.75. We got Sweden negative 0.65, and I believe Denmark is negative 0.5. Most of the European Union is negative, like the ECB, of course, is at 0. And what this show is not just the Fed that's in problem here. They are panicking because they're seeing all across the world we're in a downturn in the economy. If you go and look at economic indicators that have been coming out over the last 2 months that I've been following, most of them are turning into the negative, while it be inflation, if it's consumer confidence, if it's not so much the actual unemployment rate, because nobody cares about that. You should really look at the labor force participation rate,
of course,
which they are ignoring. Of course, they never talk about that at the Fed. They just talked about how great employment were again during Powell's speech.
Yeah, so, it's all nonsense. But John, I wanted to ask though, I mean, we're seeing people like, I recently interviewed Stephen Moore, who is one of the head contenders to chair the Federal Reserve recently, and he claimed that the interest rates going down is a sign of a great economy. Meanwhile, we see all these tremors and all these things happening at the same time, and we see them lowering interest rates. What does it tell us that we're at such low interest rates, but such catastrophic times for the global economy overall?
Well, yeah, that's the problem, is that we're looking at now we're at 2.5 at the highest with the Fed. In Canada, we're 1.75. We're 0 in the ECB. We're 0.1 in Japan, some of the major central banks in the world. And you're looking at that, and then you're trying to tell yourself that any crisis, they drop it 5 to 7% somewhere. Where are they going to go? They have nowhere to go. They're panicking. And of course, the Fed has been, selling off their assets. Meanwhile, they've been burning off the M0, which is mostly coins and notes in circulation. That has dropped almost $1 trillion. Meanwhile, their balance sheet has dropped off about 500 billion, and now they're looking at actually stopping their quantitative easing, which is basically, stopping their quantitative tightening, which is selling off these fake mortgage-backed securities, the older bonds. Who's even buying all that garbage anyways, the $500 billion?
What, you don't want to buy a 10-year bond, John?
No, it's like, hey, I'm going to go over to my septic guy and I'm going to buy 500 billion tons of raw sewage. Yeah, that would be a perfect investment for
use it to clean your house. That's the logic of these central planners.
Yeah, exactly. It would be a perfect detergent to clean, especially your toilet, with raw sewage. It's perfect. It's an oxymoron.
Great.
No, this is this is just the way we come to, Josh, where we're probably seeing now that they're going to stop their quantitative tightening, as they call it, to sell their assets. Meanwhile, they're burning off all this cash and other M0 assets. So what we're seeing is probably they're using that. They're buying up all their garbage and then removing the cash in just in total. And what you're seeing is we're at the panic stage here. They're not saying anything, of course, of panic, because they didn't do that in 2008 either. Because if they did, we would have a massive panic. And of course, it's all the Federal Reserve's fault that they're, raising and cutting interest rates. Why aren't they letting the actual free market economy make the decision on how much money is worth in the first place? Even though that I don't like the fractional reserve banking system, it's a Ponzi scheme. Why aren't they just letting the actual free market economy decide what the price of money really is?
Well, because that doesn't benefit them in the short term. It would benefit them in the long term, but it doesn't benefit them in the short term. And essentially, they're building a Tower of Babel, and they think they can build to the sky, and that they're their own gods, and they just keep building and building. And they think, well, every problem, every crack in the foundation, we'll just keep plastering over it over and over again. Maybe stick some gum in it, and eventually it'll all come tumbling down by their own design. And I think that it's very obvious that this was eventually going to happen. I mean, all fiat currencies eventually revert to the true value of zero. Always have, always will, going back to 1024 AD in China, as we've gone into so many times. And, it benefits them, like I said, in the short term, to push people into debt servitude, and they think that they're going to be able to last forever, but eventually this whole domino effect has to fall. And that's what I wanted to get into a bit with you, John, because obviously they're papering over everything. The recession never ended. They just papered it over with debt and debt and debt and tried to prop it up. And obviously it's coming back to smack them in the face. And maybe they could push it off longer. I don't see it, but maybe they could. But with that said, you see them manipulating the markets. You see all the all-time highs in the stock market, the Dow, etc. Meanwhile, they're just like throwing money at it, fake money, printed money from the $0 trading desk, the Federal Reserve on Wall Street, and then it brings to question the global economy. So you see banks like Deutsche Bank going under. You see this massive domino effect happening, the everything bubble. What does this decision by the Federal Reserve do to the global economy, which is already in ruins, essentially, in places like Europe and in places like Australia and elsewhere?
Well, first of all, Deutsche Bank is fine, Josh. What are you talking about?
All good.
Yeah, no. what we're watching right now is the demise of the current fiat currency system, and we've been talking about this for a long time, and there's been people that talked about it ever since they went off the gold standard. They didn't believe that it was sustainable, and of course it wasn't. They just created a massive bubble on an epic scale that never ever been seen in world history, that every single country in the world is on a fiat currency paper standard. Well, now it's electronic, most of it anyways, but what we're seeing is just a remnants of greatness there. And they're talking about that Fed, Powell's comments were hawkish. He's like a blind hawk flying straight toward a skyscraper and is not seeing it because like birds, they just fly straight into windows, and that's what's going to happen here too. Is you're going to see the Fed, fly straight into a window.
Yeah, but wait, John, they fly straight into windows, but most bankers in this crisis will be jumping straight out of windows.
Yeah,
so,
well,
that's
the hawk will fly in and crashing into the window, making a crack. So it'll, crack open a window, and then all the bankers would just jump out.
These analogies are terrible.
Yeah. No, but anyways, we got to be serious. So what we're seeing is a deflationary state that's starting to take grasp here on the worldwide scale. We hit peak debt, it seemed like. And one interesting comment that I got to get into before we end this video, Josh, is Powell was kind of mentioning that they're watching the corporate debt that they might be getting a little high. He was kind of mentioning that, and that means that they're panicking. They're watching the global corporate debt. Meanwhile, they are probably very knowledgeable about all the collateralized loan obligations on top of that. The billions, trillions upon trillions of derivatives that are slushing around now. That is the new version of the collateralized debt obligation that blew up the economy in 2008. On top of that, you have the auto-backed securities, which, I have stats on that people just need to go and see. Go into Infogram and look up John Sneisen and Infogram on Google, and you'll find my account where I have all this charts. But this is insane. So in 2008, 13 point something billion dollars worth of mortgages blew up the market, and that was subprime. Now you're looking at 53.2 about that, 53.2 subprime auto loans that are, could blow up the economy. And that's about 5 times higher. And that makes sense because it's 4 or 5 times higher. That's where all the banks, if you look at a grand scale, we've done videos on this, Josh. We were talking about I think it was an average of 330 something % on all central banks' balance sheets, how they increased, because that's how much money they actually printed into the economy. And that makes sense with all the debt in the world, that tripled almost.
Yeah.
So what you're seeing is they hit peak debt. They're panicking, but of course nobody's telling us that. But they're completely blind. They don't know what to do. But I think what they're gonna try to do before, as a last ditch attempt, is of course this blockchain cashless system that Project Jasper, Project Juniper, and other central banks running these cashless blockchain systems that they're trying to implement. I think that they need that in order to go below zero and actually thrive. Well, I wouldn't call it thrive, but hopefully at that time people will wake up, because when you get to that point where you have a cashless system, as you say every
by
single
legal
time,
tender
Josh,
laws.
Yeah, as you say every single time, Josh, when money's in the bank, it's not yours, and it's game over because you have zero freedoms left in your life. Unless you have Bitcoin, you have other cryptocurrencies, precious metals, you're fine. But if you don't position yourself now and start to, understand what's coming our way here, you're going to be in a lot of troubles. And I think what is needed to be done here is just completely ignore the current system and start building our own, which we are. There's lots of great minds out there that we work with that are creating, fantastic solutions through blockchain, through crypto, and to also blockchain and gold, and a whole bunch of wide array of solutions that's going to.
Which is a great time to say we're on float.app and we're on BitChute for those wondering. But absolutely.
Yeah, it totally is, revolutionary. And what's going to happen is we're going to make their system obsolete, and their old decrepit system is going to fall apart, of course, which is very natural with any, natural selection and evolution. You look at, the better systems evolve and take over. And that's what you're going to see. You're going to see decentralized ledger systems that's going to completely eviscerate this centralized legal tender government-run currencies.
It'll totally replace the system. We see that with Uber and Airbnb and other things, which might not be the most efficient systems, but they are definitely replacing the old guard mafia systems of the government. But I wanted to mention, like, again, the banking system is bankrupt according to their cash to deposit ratio, which you've gone into on their balance sheets in the past many times. We've been warning about it for a long time. We see the everything bubble worldwide, derivatives bubble that's multi-quadrillion dollar levels worldwide, the pension bubbles and the shortfalls worldwide that are absolutely crazy. And then, of course,
nothing to worry about, Josh. Nothing to worry about.
Yeah, and it's all debt dependency. All debt dependency. It forces you down that bottomless pit of debt, forcing you to ask for a ladder up from the government and the banking system, putting you into perfect servitude to them, of course. But with that said, there are so many solutions, and I think this interest rate decision will actually have a profound effect on cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and gold and silver as well. Mostly gold, but silver down the line, which I think is one of the most undervalued.
Which is actually, silver's been on the move lately, and actually the gold-silver ratio has been going down, so that is also telling us something, by the way.
Yeah, and of course we're seeing vast manipulation in those markets as well, but it can only last as long as a banking system exists. But with that said, yeah, I think this is going to lead to many solutions, and this is my opinion, of course, but I think that a lot of people will move to things like Bitcoin and Dash and Digibyte and, you know, all these other cryptocurrencies that are providing safe ground, and Monero privacy coins like that are properly decentralized and fundamentally useful cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin Cash as well. And with that said, you can look at things like gold and silver historically that have provided people wealth insurance. It's not meant as an investment. You could invest in it, but it's not meant as an investment. It's meant as wealth insurance to protect your purchasing power against these crash courses of history that we've seen so many times before, as it's happened so many times before. And they could only be desperate and force you into that system so long as you obey that system and you go along with that system. And it's getting easier and easier to deny that system your subservience. So I think that's really important going forward. But of course, it comes down to personal responsibility, financial education and responsibility, the basis of freedom itself. And of course, food, water, shelter, self-defense. You're not gathering things for the toughest guy on the block. But again, there's no reason to be, well, you should be concerned, but you shouldn't be scared. You should be looking at the solutions, because there's more solutions than problems in this world. And I think it's time that we start digging into those solutions to the best of our abilities. Now, as we close it off, as many of you might know, we have been heavily shadow banned here on YouTube, and we can't do it without you. We do have Anarchadelphia coming up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which is, you could use promo code WAM, W-A-M, stateofanarchy.com. It is linked in the description as well as the comments below. So go there and you can get your tickets to Anarchadelphia, another great event. Anarchy is basically becoming viral at this point, as Jeff Berwick recently pointed out on Anarchast with the team at Anarchadelphia. We just had Anarcha Vegas here in Las Vegas. Great event. We loved it. Had a great time seeing everyone. And coming up on that, obviously we have the Winnipeg Crypto Conference in October, which you could also use promo code WAM. Linked below, another great event that's coming up, and I can't wait to see everyone there. And of course, we have Subscribestar, where we release subscriber-only content for you guys out there, for those that are interested at $4.99 US dollar tier a month or up. And of course, we have Patreon, GoFundMe, we have Bitcoin, which will be linked at the end of the video in the outro, as well as all these other cryptocurrencies, which you could find on our Steemit as well. And we have Float.app, which is a new application, a new social media, which is helping us reach people, as YouTube doesn't allow us to reach people anymore, evidently. And we also have BitChute, where we are trying to catch up and post all of our videos on there as well. That, among many others. Make sure to check those links below. We really appreciate everyone joining us. Again, there's more solutions than there are problems, but it comes down to you guys watching this, to be the change you wish to see and get above all this crazy madness that we see in this world that in the end can scare a lot of people. But I mean, there's no point in standing there being scared when there's all these solutions on our doorstep, and we can create those solutions for ourselves as well and our families and keep them safe down the line. People have been saying, you've been saying this stuff forever, and we've been right forever, and we can't put a date on the crisis. We just know that it's going to happen inevitably, as it always has, because this fiat empire has always failed throughout history. So we now see all these tremors, and they're adding up to everything that we've been predicting for years, and we've been bang on, by the way, to those people that have just tuned in for the first time, don't watch our videos and comment within the first 10 seconds of our videos, who are surely not watching this part of the video. So anyway, I really appreciate you talking with us again today here, John. We will be coming back at you with much more on this subject going forward, and much more on many different subjects here at World Alternative Media. So I hope you stay tuned and check in regularly. Click to be notified. Check in to see if you've been unsubscribed, and do whatever you can to get around this shadow banning, because it is getting crazy, guys. So anyway, thanks for joining us again, John. And until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson and John Sneisen signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change. Like what you see here at WAM, don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon, we can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we're so heavily demonetized and censored and shadow banned. It's getting really bad, folks. If everyone just gave $1 single a month to, say, Patreon or our Subscribestar, where we do subscriber-only content, we could really get out of this rut that we are currently in as YouTube tries to stifle independent media and prop up the mainstream media. This is really important. This is one of the most important times in independent media history for us to say it's now or never. Let's keep moving forward and let's be that change that we wish to see in the world. Of course, there's also our Bitcoin address below as well as on the screen for you to scan if you please, and find us on websites like BitTube and Minds, and just try to support independent media, if not myself, any of the other big independent medias out there, to help us continuously bring our message to you free of charge, so that we can really change the guard as we move forward into a dramatically polarized, crazy future. Let's try to make it as sustainable as possible. It comes down to you guys. You are the change you wish to see. You guys will help us get through these tough times. So anyway, check out all those links, and until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
I'm sure you have already changed people's minds in your young age because you're involved, and I like that.